Hey everyone. I don't know if we have people joining yet, but we are having a couple technical issues and we should get started in just a second. Thank you, people who are here. Bia just cut out, but we are getting her back online now. I see there's currently a few of you online. Thanks for joining us. Having a couple technical snags. There we go. Bia.
Hello.
Welcome. Welcome to the broadcast. Thanks for joining us. I know you're busy.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'll just do a quick little intro. I'm Colin. I'm the president of the Brooklyn Psychedelic Society, and we're joined today by my good friend Bia Labate. I said your last name right, correct?
Correct.
I used to say Labat, and I think a lot of people do, but it's actually Labate, everybody. She is the executive director of Chacruna.net and is also starting a conference that's happening in 2 weeks from now, all virtual, called the Psychedelic Liberty Virtual Summit, which was formerly taking place in San Francisco, but will now all be online. And I'm going to be coming. The Brooklyn Psychedelic Society is a community sponsor for this online event, and we're going to hear about that event and also discuss some other related topics here with Bia. Bia, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Quarantine in San Francisco. Staying basically home. Missing the outside world, but keeping busy with the conference.
Cool. How was the transition from doing a physical in-person conference to an online one?
Originally, for us, it was, a bit of a bomb, and we were totally bummed out, and I guess follow a little bit people's regular process of denial, lingering, panicking, desperation, and then give a big deep breath, and we could decide to make it on the fall or even next year or going online. We had some internal heated debates and finally decided to go online, and I think it was a really good call, and we're feeling pretty good about it, although it's been overwhelming in terms of organizational issues. We're a small team. I want to thank my good friend and partner Josh Meadows and Horacio Guevara. We are working 24/7 on all the challenges and adaptations, and then we had to cancel a few sessions. We needed to invite more moderators and do a series of adaptations. The original format of breakout sessions we had to adapt a bit, and several other details to better do this transition. We call it the online transition.
Yeah, almost like a liminal staging you guys had to go through, initiation process. What is the Psychedelic Liberty Summit about in a nutshell, or not a nutshell?
It's about decriminalization, legalization, medicalization, commodification, and access. It's about the intersection between psychedelics, legality, and policy. So it's very focused conference. It has a very narrow set of questions, but it ends up being quite broad. But it aims to unite activists, researchers, community leaders, lawyers, to talk about the future of the psychedelic renaissance. And we include substances like psilocybin, ayahuasca, cannabis, ketamine, MDMA, peyote, and talking about future modes of regulation and what's going to happen to this different modalities, the religious use, the medical use, the recreational or social use, and including questions on human rights, ethics, conservation, sustainability, giving a big focus on Native American issues and peyote. And I'm happy to explore all these topics here.
Me too. These are all really exciting. Is this one of the first times a conference like this is taking place? Do you know?
Yeah, I think so. In 2018, we did a conference called Cultural and Political Perspectives on Psychedelics, and we included that for-profit models end up putting profits in front of people, and so they are critical of for-profit models, while other people argue that for-profit is the only way to really escalate and bring profits. Bring the profits or the benefits of mental health. And then other people will go further and, well, this distinction is kind of problematic in itself, because for one thing, there's a lot of other in-between models, other variations like public benefit corporation. This is one line of thinking. And then another line of thinking is to say, in fact, this is a false dichotomy, because a given legal form of organization does not guarantee a specific pattern of behavior. So it's less about whether it's for profit or not, but what are the intentions and modus operandi of these different players. And so we have this panel that has a person that has worked for the FDA for many years, and we have a representative of the for-profit model that advocates for the need for for-profit, and we have other ones that are like engaged in public health discussions and talking about the need of stakeholder inclusivity, distributed local ownership, and cooperative structures. This is a big one set of big questions that we're going to address in this conference.
Could I ask you? So you said you've been in this field for a while, and you've been in it way before for-profit companies were even eyeing it. Can you just say a little bit about your background and when you started researching psychedelics and how you got into the field to begin with?
Yeah, I am an anthropologist. I have a PhD in social anthropology from the State University of Campinas, Unicamp, and I've been researching these topics since my whole career. And so my main focus are plant medicine, especially ayahuasca, but also peyote and other plants. I study more the ritual, the religious, the shamanic use of plant medicines, but also study drug policy and the interface between traditional drug use and the use, contemporary use and urban uses. And so I have been publishing a lot of papers and doing research field work in Mexico, in Brazil, in Peru, in Colombia. And since 3 years ago, I've been living in the US, where with a team of people, we created the Chacruna Institute of Psychedelic Plant Medicines.
That was founded 3 years ago?
Yeah, the founding date is a little bit relative. I mean, this originated as a blog. Chacruna was originally a blog, and then we created it as a incorporated in the state of California, and now we submitted our paperwork to foundation dates for Chacruna, but I consider it more or less like 3 years. since 2017. Chacruna existed since before.
And what would you say the main? I know that you guys do a lot, and you have a lot of different like subcommittees and councils. That man, people are saying the sound keeps cutting out. I apologize to our viewers if it keeps cutting out. It's a little shaky internet on my end, I think. But I heard you on the Psychedelics Today podcast talking about kind of how if you have an interest in other areas of society like basketball or law or cooking, there's institutions you can go to kind of explore that, but we don't have that with the psychedelics. Is that something that Chacruna is trying to fill, would you say?
Yeah, not only us. I think a lot of people like us, are trying to create spaces where you can have critical conversations and promote the integration of these substances into our societies. And so we have different vocations. One vocation of ours is we have the Chacruna Chronicles. The Chacruna Chronicles aim to publish short articles by academics in a more accessible format, so to kind of make academic knowledge more accessible to the larger audience. Then we have the Ayahuasca Community Committee that's trying to create harm reductions to the globalization of ayahuasca and to better integrate ayahuasca into our societies and talk about reciprocity and commodification and cultural appropriation, safety, ethics, intercultural dialogues. We have created ayahuasca, the guidelines for raising awareness in sexual abuse, published a document on the commodification of ayahuasca, working on a few other projects in this line of work. We also have a racial equity and access committee, and we promoted a big a series of actions to try to increase diversity and inclusion in the field. So we have a page that is called People of Color Making a Difference in the Field of Psychedelic Science, and it's a series of collections of people of color that have impressive careers and CVs, and we list their bios and areas of interest and previous presentations. And with that, we have been influencing a lot of conference organizers, journalists, or documentaries that lack, just have white people or men, and we're trying to create, give access to more people. We published a statement on promoting equity in the field that it was made by our colleagues, Kat and Genesee and others, and we collected a series of signatures. It's a kind of commitment for people to create diversity and inclusion in the field, and there's maybe more than 50 institutions, and I don't know also how many, 50 or more individual signatories. We have a committee on sexual and gender diversity. We promoted a big conference called Queer in Psychedelics, and we have launched a manifesto on how to create like a psychedelic assisted therapy that is more aware to the LGBT needs. So how to raise this reflection on diversity in the field of sexuality and gender. And so we also have a strong...
What are some of those ways? Like, you are a queer person of color, right?
Well, I guess in the...
Or you identify
the US
as that?
system,
Yeah.
in the U.S. system of classification, which is not universal. I guess I am Latin, I am queer. We're queer, we're here.
Queer and here.
Get
What are some of the ways that therapy can be more beneficial for the LGBT community?
Well, I would like to, post the link to that manifesto to your readers, and
Sure.
I invite. It was created by Alex Belzer and our, with feedback committee. I also want to invite the people of to watch all the videos in our YouTube channel. We have this. We have 6 conferences that are entirely available. Queer and Psychedelics is all there. We also did a series of small videos, but I can talk about that. But I kind of wanted to focus more on
let's focus
on the launch of the protection of sacred plants that is coming with this conference, which is the other program of the Chacruna Institute.
So what is the Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants?
This is a group of lawyers and activists and researchers that are trying to create an institution to protect sacred plants, protect and honor sacred plants. So we talk about psychedelics in general, but let's say our main vocation is plant medicines. Mm-hmm. I particularly, as I said, more ties to ayahuasca and peyote, but have also done a series of other substances. So the Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants advocate for the legality of sacred plants among indigenous people and non-indigenous people. We aim to encourage legal harm reduction and create ways to protect these people, educate people about conservation of plant species, because when we talk about legality, it's not just about our rights, but also about our obligations and our needs to give back to the plants and to keep the plants alive. And then we also do just educational work, like we encourage legal harm reduction. Sorry, I said that already. We document relevant legal and social issues. We consult on legal cases, including possible litigation. And we have been producing extensive academic research and multimedia educational materials about all of this, have a catalog of documents and reports on arrests, ethical issues, safety, public health concerns. And we foment a network of researchers, lawyers, activists, and we have been doing also a lot of consultancy for academics, so a lot of people that are producing PhDs or masters in these areas. We receive them, we help them find sources, find materials, and we also produce advocacy for drug reform. And the Psychedelic Liberty Summit, it's kind of the official launch for the Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants. But we have already been working together for around a little over a year. We have a very vibrant listserv and a bunch of really kick-ass lawyers and, let's say, psychedelically friendly lawyers. If you have a problem with if you take psychedelics, you want to find a psychologist that is friendly to psychedelics, or at least is not treating you like you're doing some kind of major criminal or pathological act. The same in the case of lawyers. If you have a legal problem, you don't want to be landing with a lawyer that is very prejudiced and against psychedelics, because frequently people have been boycotted by their own lawyers that treat them as narcs or stuff. So it's a group of psychedelically friendly lawyers that are trying to raise the conversation and create protections. A lot of our work is focused on ayahuasca and on religious freedom.
So what the protection implies that there's something, within, I know there's probably a lot, but what are some of the main issues facing sacred plants that requires something like this?
Well, I think, there's different discussions, and the conference will talk about different aspects. One important aspect has to do with conservation. So peyote particularly is a cactus that takes a long time to grow and is fragile. It can take anything from 10 to 30 years to become a strong, cactus. And so there is a shortage of peyote. The Native Americans have made an internal study, and they call it the peyote crisis. There is a market for peyote in South Texas, and it's each time harder and harder to find peyote. and peyote is being sold only in like small buttons that are baby peyotes that shouldn't be consumed. And there's a whole discussion regarding access and sustainability, conservation.
So
That is
there's
one.
currently a shortage of peyote.
Yes, it's a peyote is facing a lot of challenges, and as I've been saying around, and I'm not the only one, but we have a great emphasis on this. It's just kind of incredible on how much noise and people are so happy and excited to celebrate the therapeutic potentials of MDMA and psilocybin, and there's so much money coming into this new psychedelic industry, but so little interest in looking to our own traditions and our backyard and what's happening with the native people of the U.S. and their main sacrament. Peyote is the main sacrament of the Native American church.
Mm-hmm.
Native Americans are very marginalized in the U.S. There's still a lot of prejudice and very little money and attention.
Mm-hmm.
We have a strong presence of Native Americans in our conference, and this is something that I'm especially excited about. But of course, I am a nerdy anthropologist,
Yes.
so I guess I'm biased. So we have
Well,
Sioux or Lakota.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say the ethnicities, just from the U.S. And we have Diné and Navajo, or Navajo. These are like the traditional names or the colonized English versions.
Mm-hmm.
Newe or Shoshone-Bannock, Anishinaabe or Obije. I don't know how to say these words, and I apologize in advance. Or Numu or Comanche. And we also have from South America, we have Dayara Tucano, and we have Miguel from the Yumiak. So we have a strong Native American presence, and I'm also especially excited that we have, a few of these people have not been yet to psychedelic science conferences, and this is like their debut, and I hope it's for the best for them and not for the worse. I am particularly, so there's the Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative, and there's a nonprofit that does work, two nonprofits that do work in Mexico, the Wixárika Research Center and Yérica. They're also our community partners. And I'm excited with the presence of Troy. He is Comanche. He's co-director of SIA. The name of that project is the Comanche Nation Ethno-Ornithology.
Ornithology? No, not bird
How?
research.
Yeah.
Ornithology? Is that how you say that?
Ornithological.
What's that mean?
Sorry. It's they have a nonprofit that is the only tribal feather repository in the United States. They give access to 574 tribal nations. They give access to legal feathers for ceremonial use and to support their cultural sovereignty.
What are the feathers used for?
The feathers are used for ritualistic purpose, for ceremonial uses. So they breed artificial eagles through artificial insemination. They're probably the people that have bred more eagles in the whole history ever. So there's a lot of parallels
you don't know
between
my eagle collection, but go on.
A lot of parallels between the feathers and peyote. So they're, both the eagle and peyote are central in Native American cultures. And so we have a clash of laws, like environmental laws and religious freedom. In one case, of peyote is environmental laws, drug laws, and religious freedom.
Could you touch on each of those? Like, what are the environmental laws impacting peyote production?
Well, peyote is a scarce resource, and you can't really cultivate it, and it's the ability of the natural populations to regenerate is smaller than the number of people that are eating peyote. So you have a mathematical problem. You have simply more people eating peyote than peyote's ability to regenerate. And then there is a discussion over access. who should have access? Only Native
Mm-hmm.
Americans, or other Americans, only federally recognized tribes, or maybe tribes that are not federally recognized? What about non-indigenous use of peyote? In Mexico, there's multiple other stakeholders that consume peyote as well. There's a big set of use of peyote on for creation of ointments and gels that are tonic, give resistance. So this is one of the sets of discussions. We also have a panel with indigenous women voices on peyote, which is pretty awesome. It's just Native American women talking about peyote. We put a lot of care and a lot of love into this conference. We've been working on it for over a year. And yeah, we're pretty excited about everything that is ahead to come.
I'm really excited too. I cannot wait to attend. You don't have a mother named Sonia, do you?
Yes, I do.
Sorry the sound is cutting,
Hi,
guys.
Mom.
I'm looking at the chat. She says the sound is cutting. Sorry, guys. I think it might be in my end. I'll try to get that fixed. In the meantime, I'll just have to keep going. Could you please give a summary of this? I think a lot of people know the story of like LSD in the United States, but in an interesting way, this is like the indigenous population's kind of native sacrament. Can you give a little history of peyote in North America?
Yeah, well, peyote has been used by the Native American Church. The Native American Church is a relatively recent phenomenon from the 19th century. So as Native people were put on reservations, they connected to each other and created a kind of pan-indigenous ritual that draws on different Native traditions, that also has some Christian influences in some cases, and decided to incorporate in the format of a church, also including due to already early time worries about legal aspects. And so the Native American Church was incorporated maybe in 1918 or something like that. Early on, it has passed a whole history of battles to legalize the sacrament of peyote. There is a discussion on whether ratios of different blood quantum, and a whole discussion on how do you define indigeneity and who gets to be put inside these rites and who doesn't get to put inside these rites. And peyote is very central to a lot of Native American people, and it's a form to maintain social unity and strengthen the territory, strengthen identity, keep hope, keep the community united. I have been in the South Texas twice and followed a bit one of the Native American internal meetings. There's a big worry about peyote conservation. There's also another institution called the Cactus Conservation Institute that is led by Dr. Martin Terry. He's a great friend of mine and a kind of idol and a kind of mentor, and he has been doing really important work on the conservation of peyote. A student of his, Anya Emarkova, she's also going to participate. So I have lived in Mexico 5 years, and I have had the chance to eat peyote over there. And peyote is a very beautiful medicine. It gives a lot of strength, and I have my deep respect for peyote, and it has helped me a lot. I lived in the semi-deserts of Mexico, and I felt pretty lonely, and it was pretty challenging. And I have a lot of gratitude for this medicine. And I'm really happy that we got all these different players that, agreed to participate. Mm-hmm. The Native Americans have recently launched a document criticizing the decriminalization of peyote, and this has generated quite a bit of controversies. We're also planning to look at
they criticize the decriminalization of it?
yes, they're worried with conservation and access, that worry that a lot of people might want to have access to the peyote gardens in South Texas. We published this piece in Chacruna, but we also have different perspectives that are more aligned with the topic of conservation, and think that actually decriminalization is good because it gives access to cultivation. Others think that white people should stay out of it altogether, and others feel that perhaps you could have a mixed model where non-indigenous people would cultivate their own peyote and you would leave peyote in the wild only for Native Americans. We have one session that is specially dedicated to discussing all of this. Also, it's important to note that not all Native Americans have the same position. There's also differences in like generational differences. Maybe some older folks are more resistant to the idea of cultivation than young ones. Some people think that greenhouses are really sacrilege. Other finds that it's really the only solution. And so all of this we plan to talk about in the conference.
Could you, if you don't mind sharing, what gives you such gratitude for peyote? If you don't mind sharing some of your subjective experiences with it.
I don't know. I'm a little bit shy, It's like I don't know. It's kind of like talking about sex on camera. It's kind of a personal, relationship. I mean, it's like it's like a profound spiritual blessing. It's something that it's just it just shows you, what is the invisible world, what you don't see in your normal eyes, but the truth and the reality of life, and and beyond, and eternity, and or infinity, or the invisible world, the ancestral world, the world of the spirits, the world of those that came before us, and our ideas of time and space. It's very philosophical and very spiritual, and I find a lot of I think that I, like everybody else nowadays, in modernity or post-modernity or whatever you want to call it, we feel there's a lot of disjuncture, and we all have this kind of existential burden, kind of deep issue with being alive. And I kind of just feel better, when I take psychedelics. I kind of remind who I am and what we're doing here, and especially in this kind of, I'm more friendly to ceremonial and traditional use, and I'm also an anthropologist, so I just simply adore. I adore music. I adore tradition and culture, and studying culture and understanding the meaning, and seeing how culture evolves and transforms. The study of culture for me is as satisfying and as spiritual as the experience itself. So I feel, I'm like a fish in my waters, or as they say in Portuguese, you ask a monkey if he likes banana, and yes, he does. So I just feel very good in these environments, and I try to keep my practice alive in order not to become a bureaucrat, as I was bugged by my friend, one of my ayahuasca teachers, not to become a mouse shaman, a shaman of the computer, just writing ayahuasca in the computer all day. I have more tradition, much more tradition with ayahuasca than peyote. As a matter of fact, ayahuasca is the main.
With sitting with ayahuasca.
Yeah, I have been drinking ayahuasca for 23 years.
When was your first ayahuasca session?
2 of November of 1996, Day of the Dead in Brazil.
Would you mind describing the story of how you came across it the first time?
You just want the personal juicy stuff, huh?
I think it's good to go between the scientific ornate greatness that you're describing with the personal juice, back and forth. If it's too personal.
Because it's just like I don't feel I'm equipped. I think that.
Or just what's the story of how you encountered it the first time? Like, what was Bia 1996? What was pre-ayahuasca Bia, and then what occurred to take place, and yeah, something like that.
I think pre-ayahuasca Bia was even, much worse than the current Bia. I think what I like to say is that I would have been much worse. I'm still pretty bad, but I'm much worse if I hadn't taken ayahuasca. So, no, it was in the UDV, in this local
And that's
town.
Unio de Vegetal for our listeners, right?
Yes, União do Vegetal is one of the Brazilian ayahuasca churches, and I tried it, and I just felt home, and I just felt that I understood everything, and everything made sense. It was this great comfort, and it's magical for me. Ayahuasca is magical. It's so beautiful. It's so poetic, and to me, it's about connecting to this other side that I'm very rational and mental and critical and academic, intellectual, and it just connects to this magic of the universe and of everything around us and beyond, and it's just like feeling part of everything, and feeling like I feel ayahuasca is like a friend, like an ally. It's you check in there and you kind of see your yeah, you see things how they are. You see really cut all the fantasy and just go straight to the source, and it's incredible how a plant, it's what indigenous people call it, a teacher plant or a master plant. This idea that you have a being that is intelligent. Ayahuasca is like alive, and it has the ability to teach you if you communicate and if you obey certain rules and prescriptions and take it seriously and be a dedicated student. And then ayahuasca can teach you, can inspire you, can punish you, can reward you, and it's like a process. It's like a relationship. Every time you take again, you go to the same spots. It's like if you're navigating a different universe, and then you start to learn how to walk in that universe. So it's a path, and it's never ending. It's a whole life, and the more you do it, the more you don't know anything, and the more you feel you're just a beginner, and the more you're just like connected to that being and that power and that magic. And is that good?
That's good. A plus. You said that in
Conference.
what?
Can we talk about the conference again?
Oh, we will. Just one more question. This, I think, we'll tie it back. But on our topic of our talk of religious and cognitive freedom, you describe this as kind of like a path, the psychedelic plant path. And do you see that as a possible cure for like postmodern malaise that our society puts people in, or a potential path for them?
Yeah, I think definitely ayahuasca. It's been super popular, and it has been spreading. Like the genie is completely out of the bottle. The levels to which ayahuasca is globalizing is completely mind blowing. Mm-hmm. I think that maybe it's not too much to guess that there is in every city of America an ayahuasca ceremony happening every weekend. Mm-hmm. And ayahuasca has to Russia, to South Africa, India, all over South America, Central America, Europe, and we just hear more and more. So there is something very profound and very strong about.
Okay, I think we're back online. Sorry guys, my internet is not the best. Something I need to fix next time. Bia was talking about another part of the conference that my question about the plant path and ayahuasca spreading around the globe. So what was that part you were talking about, please?
I was saying that ayahuasca has expanded incredibly all around the globe. In my lifetime, I have noticed this. Like, I am witness of this story. When I started doing my master's, started taking ayahuasca, I was, I think, about 26, and I'm 48. I'll be 49. And like when I was doing my master's, just to find groups in the city that were not part of Santo Daime and the UDV, I'm talking about Brazil. It was extremely hard and challenging, and like I had to like look really hard. And are you there, Colin?
I'm there. You can't hear me?
Yeah. No, I just lost the screen.
Okay.
And now you have, you see groups all over. In São Paulo, there is like dozens of ceremonies every weekend. When I started drinking ayahuasca, you could hardly Google and find centers. I mean, and I am not the first generation of people that discovered it. Imagine the people from the 60s or 70s, early 70s, the first people that talked about ayahuasca to the West and outside the Amazon. Of course, there's early reports since much longer, but in a more popular, and it's just very revolting to see the levels of ignorance and prejudice and misunderstanding about what these plants are, and this idea that they are pathological or criminal or demoniacal, or that they create hallucinations, create some kind of dissociation from reality. A lot of our views on these substances are, informed by religious views that that are just, completely out of touch. And so one of the main topics of the conference is to try to advance the regulation of ayahuasca in the United States. And there's a large discussion about this. I also want to tell all the people that are listening to us that I have written a paper with two lawyers that are also part of the council, Kevin and Jesse, about religious freedom and ayahuasca in the U.S. I think this is perhaps the most comprehensive paper that exists on this topic. And I have also written a few other articles published on journals about ayahuasca legality in the U.S. And outside the U.S., a few books. Our materials are available, and if you can't afford them, just shoot me an email and I'll share, as long as you don't post online, only for personal use. But I wanted to invite people to talk about this discussion about religious freedom and the use of psychedelics in the United States. So one path is like clinical trials and medical use, and I think this path is quite complicated for ayahuasca, although there are people that want to develop ayahuasca as a pharmaceutical drug. There is currently one research project that aims to do that. And, there's a series of ethical issues involving that and challenges. But talking about the religious route, I think, is a more interesting conversation. So it's important that people know that, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act gives us rights, and so we as citizens have rights, and it's a very interesting discussion that I like very much. So what is this?
The Religious
It's the idea
Freedom
that
Clause of the Constitution?
Yeah, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, it has these mechanisms that establish a prima facie case. What is this? It's like when you have like a set of laws that are bumping heads with each other. So you have drugs laws on the one side, and then you have religious freedom on the other. How do you negotiate that? That's not just exclusive to psychedelics. You can have other religious practices that don't fit other laws. For example, religions that are not monogamous, or reject vaccination by children, or reject using a helmet on your head when you're driving a motorcycle. All kinds of religious autonomy that would clash with other laws that are supposed to be there in place to protect public health and the common well-being. So what happens when you have a clash of these two laws? Who wins? The religious freedom? So I want to say, this is my religious freedom and I want to do this. I don't want to, for example, bring my children to school, and I think they shouldn't be or serve the army or other things like that. In the case of religious freedom, what exists is the following: is this religion? A religion must demonstrate that the practice in question is. And I want to, I want to share this with people because I find it extremely interesting. So one aspect that you have to prove is that you are religious in nature. The, so that is like, I can just cook up any kind of invention and say, well, that's my belief. That belief has to be sincere. And third is that this burden is placed on the government.
Sorry, Bia.
The government has the substantial.
I think I cut
Yes?
out for.
A series of past cases that judges look into and compare to that. And the definition of religion in these cases are pretty inspired in like monotheistic religions. So they identify elements that they consider that are symbolic of a religion. For example, do you have a founder, a prophet, or a teacher? Do you have important writings? Do you have gathering places? Do you have keepers of knowledge? Do you have ceremonies and rituals? Do you have a structure and organization? Do you have certain holidays? Do you have certain like dietary prescriptions? Do you have some kind of appearance and clothing? Do you have means of propagation? So the definitions of religion don't necessarily match these other forms of religiosity or spirituality that people practice with ayahuasca.
And does it
so
line...
shamanism or other more...
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask, it's like the...
No, I'm saying...
I was going to say the precedents that the Religious Freedom Act is based on for what qualifies as like a bona fide religion is just based on past precedents, and it doesn't really even align with contemporary scholarship. Was that an accurate statement, you think? Like, is there a definition of religion?
I lost you a bit.
Oh.
There isn't a definition of religion. There is a reference that judges use. And what we're trying to do is to kind of advocate that these contemporary uses of ayahuasca do qualify as religious. That you have to have a wider perspective of this definition of religion. So the DEA has placed a mechanism that you can ask for religious exemption to use certain psychoactive drugs. And then there's a whole discussion that is very technical on whether people should follow this path or not. And so there's a whole session in the conference that will address this. Some lawyers feel very badly that the DEA mechanisms is illegitimate per se, and the DEA should not be doing this kind of selection, and that they think that it's just a way, like it would. The DA is like playing this mice and cat game where you file a document, then they say, okay, but I also need this. And after 6 months, they say, now I need this. And then more 6 months, well, now I need this. So play this cat and mouse game. And there has been like a constant uproar. People are very unpleased and tired of illegality. Ayahuasca users in the U.S. had it. It's kind of enough, to not have your rights protected and your religious freedom protected. And so people are very tired of of being.
That's been one of my pet theories as to why you don't hear about too many ayahuasca ceremonies getting raided or anything like that. I'm wondering if the reason they don't get raided is because the DEA kind of knows that people are doing it in a genuine spiritual way and worried that it would go to the Supreme Court or something if they stopped it. Does that resonate with you at all? Do you think that's a coherent idea?
Yeah, I think that could be, I don't know if I would phrase it like that, like the DA knows that this is, good religious practice. I think it's definitely not on, priority on their radar. They have other things that they're more worried about. But the whole drug war machine is very irrational. So, this is part of the roller coaster, or, the gambling game of the drug laws. They don't care a lot, but they can pick on few cases once in a while. So if you get to be picked, it's not good for you. And, the burden of being persecuted is very, very high. And there has been raids. We published an article in Chacruna about 2 arrests. Nobody was on jail, but there has been at least 4 or 5 cases in the United States. We also know Taita Juan.
In what time period? The 4 or 5 cases?
I don't know out of the top of my head, but since I think maybe late 90s or something, not to talk about the arrests of Santo Daime and UDV that afterward became legal, but, one of the more important one that we know of is Taita Juan, and Taita Juan is special dear friend and very, related to a lot of us in Chacruna. He was caught, I think, in the Houston airport. The people that were expecting him went picking him up, and he never showed. And he was about I think 10 days stuck in the airport. The people tell the story. It's super amazing. They say that when finally they managed to get a hold of him, he was very calm, and he had been healing and singing to all the prisoners in the airport, and had been helping all kinds of people there, doing his shamanic work. But he was banned from coming to the U.S., and we wanted to invite Taita Juan to do the opening of Psychedelic Liberty Summit and do a kind of test on whether he would have his visa denied or not, because he was sent back to Colombia and told he couldn't return to the U.S. So they kind of made an agreement. All right, you don't need to stay arrested, but you can't come back. So we have that, as I say, is a big focus of the conference. And related to that, there's also just a discussion on decriminalization. So there's a big panel with some of the main representatives of the main decriminalization initiatives in the U.S. David Bronner will talk about the project in Oregon to legalize psychedelic-assisted therapy with psilocybin kind of approach. There is Ryan Munivar from California that will talk about the project to legalize psilocybin in state level or decriminalize, better saying, on California. And we also have Kevin Matthews from Denver. And then you have all this discussion: should we legalize only psilocybin? Should we decriminalize only psilocybin? Should we decriminalize all plants? Should we decriminalize instead all drugs? Should change be incremental or not? If we don't do it right since the beginning, then it's worse. There's a discussion about psychedelic exceptionalism. A few people feel very strongly that we shouldn't treat psychedelics differently than other drugs, and that criminalization is never good in any case, and that the main substances that put black and brown communities on jail are not psychedelic plant medicines, but other substances that are scheduled. And so they feel a lot of classic drug reform people are in favor of decriminalization of all substances and think that perhaps decriminalizing only plants even adds further to the stigma of these other substances. Others feel strongly that all of these initiatives are complementary and go side by side, and that there's not a real dichotomy over there. So yeah, that's a discussion on what decriminalization actually allows you, because things, but a lot of other things are still illegal, and there's a lot of misinformation on what decriminalization actually means. So a lot of this work is aims to educate people about.
In Oakland and Denver, they're not actually decriminalized in the traditional sense. They're just deprioritized. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know all the details. I have a general understanding that that's correct. We have published one article recently in Chacruna called Myths and Realities of Decriminalization in the United States. It's by Sean McAllister, and I would also like to refer people to that.
He's one of the lawyers I saw in the webinar you guys did recently, right?
Yeah, he also participates. He's our general co-counsel, and he's also involved in the Denver review panel that is happening in Denver. Yeah.
Cool. I do want to let people ask a couple questions, but I have one more question, if you don't mind, Bia. I feel like we could talk for hours. You said earlier that a lot of people are aware of ayahuasca and interested in a lot of Americans in the United States are interested in ayahuasca, but they're not very aware of the traditions around peyote. I was wondering one, if they'll be discussing this at the conference, and two, what you think the most promising strategies are for making peyote and Native American traditions more known to the mainstream culture.
Well, I don't know if we have, to make them more known to the mainstream culture. I think we have to make them more heard. I think one of the great emphases that we have in Chacruna is to give visibility to people of color, and so our celebrities in our conferences are not white, straight, biomedical male scientists, but are Native Americans, African Americans, brown and black communities, and so I think that's one of the main focuses is to ask people to talk about themselves and hear what they have to say. This is also another big focus because it's a whole topic in itself. It's also a huge topic, which is the lack of people of color in the field of psychedelic research. So they are not included as research participants. They are not research objects, or they are not the researchers or participants as subject of research. There's really amazing data. Only 3% of psychiatrists in the U.S. are African Americans, and only 2% are psychologists. 2% of psychologists in the whole United States are African Americans. Wow. So there is a huge history of people of color not being acknowledged in the mainstream narratives of psychedelic science and healing. And I just published a special edition with Dr. Monica Williams that we talk about this, and we're trying to understand why are there less people of color engaged in psychedelic treatments, both as researchers, clinicians, and as subjects of research. So there's a few talks in the conference that are also about this. Some of the potential answers on why this is happening is because there is a huge history of the medical research establishment subjecting minorities to harm. So there's a lot of potential suspicion about medical research. There's also people of color might have fear of being administered drugs related to the fact that there is a lot of injustice in the criminal justice system. So we all know that there's a real big disproportionate rates of Latin people and African Americans being due to drug-related problems. And there's also a lot of stigma in Black and brown communities to the use of psychedelic drugs. It's the fact that the white people can talk openly about their psychedelic use, but it's not the same for the people of color. And so for a lot of African Americans, for example, psychedelic assisted therapy is considered some kind of, white treatment. And what are some of the potential ways out that we can, figure ways to invert this balance? And it starts by a strong call for the decolonization of theoretical frameworks. We are going to finish the conference with an activist that is African American. She's Deborah Small. She's a super powerful woman, very inspirational, and she has the title of her talk is "Decolonize Your Mind," and we have created a theme around it for the conference. And so, how much we still think in colonial terms and have legacies of colonial thinking, and then promote discussions on the need to provide cultural informed treatments for people of color, provide diversity in trainings. There's also research, certain diseases that have cultural background that you need to promote a clinical assessment for racial trauma. Psychedelic science has neglected to consider the role of race and ethnicity in the expression assessment of psychopathologies such as depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And well, there's a lot of other things, but I'm also, I spoke a lot. I think we can take questions and answers. Just want to add that I didn't say a lot here, but we're also talking about access and costs of MDMA for psychedelic-assisted therapy. And also, a lot of people talk about psilocybin and the treatment of depression. Do we actually know what's going to happen when they advance the clinical trials? So a discussion around the possible replacement of psilocybin from Schedule 1 to Schedule 4, and as psilocybin becomes an approved medicine. And there's a lot of implications and a lot of technical aspects, but also a lot of really interesting philosophical ones.
It sounds fascinating.
Finito.
This is probably finito. I don't believe you. It's probably one of the most exciting conferences I've seen yet in the psychedelic world. I'm really looking forward to it. You're covering a lot of topics that usually might get condensed into an hour or two in other conferences, but you're having a whole. It's over 2 days, right?
Yeah, 2 days.
Yeah.
3 simultaneous tracks, 31 sessions, 70 speakers. It's a lot.
It's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. One question we had was from Grace Seppi. I'm not sure if I'm saying her last name correct, but she did say, one second. She said, "Thank you, Bia, for your breadth of inclusivity of the indigenous peoples. I am always inspired by your work." And she asked,
"Thank you.
Has President Bolsonaro had an impact on ayahuasca ceremonies or tourism in Brazil?"
Not directly, but indirectly, yes. The situation in Brazil is very bad. Bolsonaro is one of the presidents that have been considered the one that dealt worse with the whole crisis of coronavirus. So currently, ayahuasca sessions are on hold in Brazil and everywhere else. But Bolsonaro has been doing a systematic genocide of indigenous people, of the Amazon, and of all the things that are dear and that we value. He's kind of obsessed with, gay people, black people, women, different religious expression. He has been horrible all across the board in all of these fronts. It's almost a parody, like he will put somebody that is like a pastor in charge of isolated indigenous people, and they want to go there and bring missionaries. It's like colonization at full motion. Recently, they nominated, to deal with the legacy of slavery, like we have programs of inclusivity for African Brazilians, and it had this gentleman saying, that slavery was good for black people. We have this woman on the head of women issues that is kind of like, well, women should stay home and cook for their husbands, and the ideal policy for sexuality is abstention. And so it's very dramatic and it's very sad. But with the coronavirus, it has been especially, worsened. So there's an irony that one of the most powerful leadership in the União do Vegetal, Luiz Felipe Belmonte, is like the president or the head of the UDV's broad expansion all over the world. He is like the third man of Bolsonaro's new party.
Interesting.
So that has created a lot of really bad press for the UDV, a lot of bad blood inside the Brazilian ayahuasca field. So the UDV traditionally has a lot of really important work with conservation, and they have huge gardens to plant ayahuasca and the vine, both the vine and the leaf, chacruna and ayahuasca. But on the other hand, important people of their leadership have aligned with Bolsonaro's values that are the values of the family and protection of the individual and like the right to carry guns and all those kinds of things. And the UDV has launched some kind of public note saying that they were apolitical and are religious, that they're not like partidary. But of course, a lot of people are not happy with having those kinds of, it's because these are religions that they are Christian based, and there's a lot of values that are traditional or conservative. And despite the fact that there is this like hallucinogen or, psychedelic drug or teacher plant or plant medicine, whatever you want to call, traditionally it has been used by like humble rubber tappers influenced by popular Catholicism in small towns of Brazil. So there's a lot of cross of different references, and there has been a lot of controversy. There's also a recent attempt to kind of regulate ayahuasca. So the short answer is that there is not immediate, impact, but there's a lot of danger and fear, and there's a lot of potential for backlashes.
Cool. Thank you for answering Grace's question. This is an email question I got from San Cohen. What are some of the arguments for cognitive freedom to use psychedelics, and is there any cognitive freedom precedents in the law?
The idea of cognitive freedom is more of like a philosophical stand. So you would have, different ways to criticize the drug war and say it doesn't work, it overpopulates prisons, it doesn't deal with the health consequences of drugs, or it creates improper attack on the sovereignty of other countries, or it has to proven to be inefficient, or you can't do drug control. All of those arguments are really valid and important. The cognitive freedom is a more generic one that has to do more with merits. So it's more like a question of principles. And it's this idea that your body is your sovereign territory, and it's not up to the state to regulate your relationship to your body. And so you should have the right to self-program chemically, yourself. You should have that autonomy. So there's some parallels with, like, for example, the right to abortion or the right to free sexual expression. It's about, the individuals versus the government rights to your body. Mm-hmm. And it reproduces a lot of the same sort of dilemma that happen with drugs, because it's also a lot of religious influence. This idea, for example, that a woman don't own her body, and her body is owned by, by the government, by the state, and so you could not do abortion. It's not up to you. And so that's more kind of like a discussion on the merits, which I find very interesting. Historically, the idea of cognitive freedom has been linked a lot to psychedelics, so to these substances that are more creative and therapeutic and healing and show all these potentials, it's less common to see a discourse of cognitive liberty for substances like, let's say, methamphetamine or crack or things like that. It's more related to this idea of these drugs that provide you teachings and growing and learning. And different people, there's also different laws like the rights for autonomy, the right for privacy, the right for a dignified death. Can I try to take this substance as if I am just about to die? Or, on certain conditions, I should have the liberty to take any drugs, for example. It's the same kind of thing. Like if you're in a prison and that prison is on fire and you try to escape, can you be arrested? No, you're trying to save your life. That's a kind of prerogative. So the same thing would be with drugs. You're dying and you want to take some drugs. So should you have that right? There are all kinds of discussions. I think a lot of people have filed cases and try to make attempts like that, but I don't know of anyone that that I can say out of the top of my head. Like this is a foundational case that has succeeded. The same with religious freedom. Like different people have filed different cases. Cannabis, there has been a lot of cases of religious freedom in cannabis that have been rejected. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Another email question I got. Brian emailed asking if you can elaborate on what decolonization of the mind means.
Yeah, I think it's part of what I want to figure out. Also, in this conference, I refer people to chacruna.net and our conferences there, and you can read the abstract of Deborah Small, and the title of her talk is Decolonize Your Mind. And so it has to do with deconstructing a lot of the system of knowledge that we earn from the hierarchies, the worldviews that we earn from colonization. So it's the very ways of knowing are determined by this legacy. So looking up for other forms of knowledge and other systems. There's a whole discussion, for example, in ayahuasca. Some authors call about the need for you to take this claim that ayahuasca is a species seriously. And so, if you say ayahuasca is a plant teacher and has a subjectivity and intentionality and agency, then what does that mean to take that claim seriously?
Yeah.
And so it would be, can you produce some kind of ethnography that is like an interspecies communication? How can you, try to take the plants as agents with the same ontological status as you? Or perhaps maybe you can't do that, go that far, but can you create research projects that are more collaborative and that take indigenous people's properties seriously? All of that could lay under this general umbrella of decolonization. And then there's just a very hardcore discussion on the consequences of the drug war and how the drug war has been a kind of tool to establish white supremacy, patriarchy, and the domination of black and brown bodies by the state.
Thank you for sharing that. Are there initiatives to kind of incorporate indigenous ontologies into research?
Yes, there is a whole line of work like that. We have one of our books. So I also defer everybody to go to our site. I have published 21 books in 23 years and 2 special editions.
Wow.
several chapters. As I said, we can share our materials. I recommend the paper from Laura Dev. It's exactly about this topic that I just said about interspecies communications, and there's good references in this paper. I can share the materials later.
Okay. Also, you got a shout out from Sonia and Gil Labache. I'm not sure if you know them. They said, "We're enjoying this interview."
Yes, my mom and my dad in
Yay!
São Paulo, Brazil.
Hi, Sonia and Gil. Well, those were all the questions we had. What it's on the 25th and 26th, the Psychedelic Liberty Summit, correct?
Yes, I also want to tell everybody that we're going to launch North Star. That is very thankful to our community partners, you included, Colin. Thanks for your support and your friendship and your due diligence. And want to express my gratitude to the Chacruna team and to all the allies and friends. We have like 11 sponsors, 35 community partners. This is a global effort. We have been creating carefully, like manufacturing this conference. I particularly feel pretty crushed with the emergence of, this new phenomenon. I just wrote an article about the emergence of like new psychedelic conferences that are business conferences.
Yeah.
So a lot of people coming from the space. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. The internet's Chacruna. It's one of the best beacons of light in the psychedelic scene, and I'm honored to have you had join us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Have a nice end of your day.
Good night, Bia. Bye.